Atlanta tried to make Dylan Dodd's fastball sink, but it didn't. Instead, they built a pitch that moves like Josh Hader's. And now the Braves have to decide whether to trust it with games on the line. Let's talk about it. Yes, welcome on into a special bonus edition of Braves Today here on Saturday, August 15th. I'm your host, Lindsey Crosby, author of the Braves Today newsletter over at bravestoday.com. This is a production of the Believe Podcast Network and presented to you by FanDuel. And this is a special episode talking about a recent newsletter over at bravestoday.com. So make sure you go subscribe to that. This one's about Dylan Dodd because sometimes the nerds get it right. And arguably in baseball, they get it right a lot these days. But baseball development staffs have figured out how to take seam orientation, induce vertical break, spin axis, all those kind of things, and turn them into a better pitch. And Dylan Dodd is one of those success stories. There was a pitch design change they put in place. The intention was to create a better sinker for him. But instead, it gave him something that behaves like an elite four-seamer. And when you put it next to Josh Hader's fastballs, the similarities get a little bit weird. So let's start at the beginning. Dylan Dodd debuted back in 2023 as a pretty ordinary four-pitch starter, right? Four-seam slider, curveball, change-up kind of thing. And most of the same guy that he was when they took him in the third round in 2021. And he wasn't particularly good. 29 runs and 53 hits, including 9 home runs in 34 and a third innings. He threw only 2 major league innings in 2024, pitching in a blowout because they just didn't feel like the stuff was competitive at the major league level. So he moved to relief for 2025, and the results were fine, right? 35 innings, a 3.60 ERA. And Dylan Dodd kind of explained at the time that there's a certain type of anticipatory stress that comes with starting that maybe he just wasn't best suited for. Relief really kind of simplified the whole thing. Phone rings, you got to get up, you got to get hot, and then you enter the game and start attacking hitters, right? When you're a starter, you have 4 days to think about your start and going through all those scenarios and everything. He just wasn't well suited to handle that, and that's fine. But 30 strikeouts in 35 innings, a 3.60 ERA doesn't necessarily suggest that Atlanta had a dominant reliever on their hands. And then the Braves changed his fastball grip. And when they did that, they gave him an actual legitimate weapon. So the thing to know here, Dylan Dodd's a natural pronator. So what that means kind of in normal English is when he releases the ball, his hand turns inward. And so because of that, his old four-seamer wasn't really good. He got inside the ball. The movement profile was pedestrian, right? Kind of dead zone. And that's just a common issue that a lot of pronators have. It's hard to create traditional breaking ball shapes. It's hard to have a really good four-seam fastball. The folks over at Tread Athletics, one of the premier baseball pitch development houses outside of the game, they call the combination of fastball, gyro slider, and changeup, they call that the pronator triangle because it's all things that work well for these guys that can't really get good fastballs, don't spin the ball well, and all that stuff. And the contrast to this is a supinator, a lot more common in baseball. Those are the guys that their forearm kind of externally rotates, their wrist is open, and when they release the ball, they get really good spin. These are the guys that can throw like 2 or 3 different breaking balls. They have a curveball and a sweeper and a slider, right? They have like some natural cut to their pitch shapes, and so their fastballs end up being pretty good and things like that. So one of the things the Braves did was they changed the grip on Dylan Dodd's four-seamer, and they gave him a 2-seam grip. And the idea, like when you switch a guy from a four-seamer to a 2-seamer, there's a couple things you're expecting to happen. The first one, you're thinking a lot more arm side run, right? You want that ball to end up coming back. If it's left on left, breaking back in on them. If it's left versus a right-handed hitter, it's going to run away from them. And you expect the ball to kind of sink a little bit and drop. Not what happened for Dylan Dodd. He took that grip, same throwing motion, and instead, it became kind of like a four-seam fastball. It was a sinker that just refused to sink. The old four-seamer that he threw was at 92 miles an hour, roughly 14 inches of induced vertical break. Those of you who know a lot about induced vertical break and how the backspin of the ball keeps the ball from dropping, this is roughly 2 or 3 inches below league average. So not a great shape profile. This new sinker, remember, they gave him a two-seam grip. He got a velo bump from going to relief, so it's averaging close to 94. But it went from 14 inches of induced vertical break to 17. So it went from well below average to above average induced vertical break. And it's called a sinker because that's the grip he throws it with. But this thing drops like 9.5 inches less than the average left-handed sinker drops because it's not really a sinker. It's a four-seamer. It's a four-seamer wearing a sinker name tag. That's what it is. And as of the time that we wrote this article earlier this week, he had allowed a 149 batting average on it and a 284 slug. And those are amazing numbers. And even the expected numbers are still really good. A 170 expected batting average, a 309 slug. And so just switching to that pitch alone would make this a successful development story. You took a guy with a bad fastball, you gave him a good fastball. But its movement, the fastball's movement, isn't just unusual for a sinker. It kind of closely resembles one of baseball's most recognizable relief fastballs. Like the Braves thought they were building a sinker. What they got was stranger and potentially much more useful. After the break, let's put Dodd's pitch next to Josh Hader's and explain why the comparison is more than just a joke of mine going with Diet Josh Hader. We'll do that next, right here on Braves Today. Okay, so here's the part that earned Dodd the Diet Josh Hader label. I'm not saying, be clarify up front, I'm not saying Dylan Dodd is Josh Hader. Okay, Josh Hader throws harder, he misses more bats, and he spent a full decade pitching at the end of games. But the shape and the usage of their two arsenals are remarkably similar. So when you look at the StatCast cards, you have Dylan Dodd, who throws a sinker, a cutter, and a slider. And again, Dylan Dodd's sinker, a lot less arm side run, a lot less drop than your usual sinker. And then you have Josh Hader, it's just a sinker and slider. So virtually identical usage of the sinker, 61% for Dodd, 63% for Hader. And then Dodd's cutter is about 32% usage. And that's pretty much the Josh Hader slider at 37%. And then Dodd does have a slider. I'm going to get to that slider in a second. But the induced vertical break is very similar. The arm side movement's almost identical. The active spin on it is virtually identical. Hader has a little bit better stuff plus ratings. Some of that's the velocity. Some of that's the little bit additional IVB that he gets, which those things are combined. But both of these pitches are unique and are very, very good. And both of these pitchers, in essence, have built their arsenals around a left-handed fastball, moves like a four-seamer, thrown like a two-seamer that stays above barrels. They throw that fastball roughly 60% of the time. The horizontal movement's identical. Dodd uses his cutter sequencing-wise the same way that Hader uses the slider. And so against lefties and righties, surprisingly similar on how they use these things. Dodd's whiff rate on the sinker, that's the real difference outside of the velocity, right? 24.2% for Dodd, 31.3% for Hader. And again, I'm not arguing that Dodd has become Josh Hader, but I'm showing this is a recognizable blueprint for how Atlanta can deploy Dylan Dodd. And what's really interesting when you look at this too is how the batted ball profile for Dylan Dodd got much better, and also a atypical for the pitch labels. His ground ball rate went from 52% to 31%, because a pronator throwing a four-seamer, it really just kind of moves a little bit like a sinker. And now he's throwing a sinker that moves like a four-seamer. His launch angle changed. His pop-up rate went from 3% to 17.3%. And if this was a traditional sinker, you would be freaking out, right? Your sinker is giving up a lot more fly balls. Your ground ball rate tanked. But again, this is not a traditional sinker. This is a Josh Hader style fastball intended to stay above the barrel. We talk about a lot about how ground balls are more valuable than fly balls, right? Ground balls, lower batting averages, all of that kind of stuff. Pop-ups are infinitely better. I mean, it's the actual batting average on the league on a pop-up is like 0.009 or something. It's only pretty much if Jim Jarvis dropped it at shortstop. So this is a fantastic development. And his slugging percentage fell from 464 before the change to 213. The hard hit rate fell from 51% to 32%. And the whiff rate's like 31.6%. And this is part of the reason he has these reverse splits, right? When you think about a lefty, your thought is, oh, hey, that lefty's going to be really good at getting lefties out. Josh Hader's a little bit opposite. I'm sorry, Dylan Dodd is a little bit opposite. Right-handed hitters hit 130, 178, 203 off of Dodd. Left-handed hitters hit 170, 279, 340. And I think there's room to get a little bit better here for Dodd as well. Because, again, Josh Hader's second pitch is a slider. Dodd's is a cutter, but he does have a slider. And the slider is really good. He just doesn't use it enough. The slider has a 60% whiff rate. But that's a 34-pitch sample, 15 swings. And it's reasonable to assume that as you throw that slider more, the effectiveness is going to drop. It's not going to keep a 60% whiff rate. But for a pitcher that struggles more against lefties than righties, the slider can become a weapon, and we need to see a larger sample size. Now, Dylan Dodd's kind of breakout thing here isn't entirely like perfect, right? He had a 2.02 ERA when I wrote the article, but his batting average on balls in play was a 183. His strain rate was 85%. A little bit of regression off of that is going to likely occur, but the expected batting average, the expected slugging, the barrel rate, the hard hit rates, all of these things still support that Dylan Dodd is capable of being a high leverage reliever. The ERA you can give back a little tiny bit of the ERA if you ramp up the slider and if you have a more normal batting average on balls in play and strand rate. That doesn't invalidate the fact that this is a breakout that is actually legitimate. And I think that's a big deal here. Is you have a much better version and a high leverage guy. The issue is, when I wrote this article, Dodd had faced 135 hitters this year, and 11 of them were in high leverage situations. The Braves have developed a guy that resembles a leverage reliever without actually using him as one. Now, since I wrote this, Dodd got the 8th inning yesterday in a 1-0 game. Loaded the bases with one out, got out of it, didn't allow a run. Really good battle. Was really impressed with the way the at-bat went. And when you look at the details and how he ended up loading the bases, some of that was a little bit fluky and not necessarily something where you can blame him for it. So, like, one additional appearance since I wrote this article doesn't settle the leverage question. But, like, that was exactly the kind of test that I've tried to argue in the piece that the Braves needed to be giving Dylan Dodd. And so now he's at a 2.11 ERA, 40 strikeouts, 0.86 whip over 38 and a third innings. So, end of the day here, Dylan Dodd is not Josh Hader. Atlanta doesn't need him to be, but you need another reliever capable of getting important outs in October, especially because you didn't acquire a high leverage reliever at the deadline. But the pitch design change is real. The cutter gives him an answer to right-handed hitters. The slider might eventually be one against lefties. We just need to see it more. And even if that ERA rises a little bit, the underlying results, the inputs here say that this is a legitimate breakout, not just necessarily luck. The Braves tried to build a sinker, and they wound up with something kind of much more interesting. And the nerds did their part here, right? They dove into all the stuff. They said, hey, do this, and it worked. But now Atlanta, Walt Weiss, they've got to trust what the nerds built. And because you're in this situation of you did not go get a impact frontline starter at the deadline, and you're going to piece together 27 outs. We got good news on Robert Suarez on Friday. He threw toss from like 75 feet. He's increasing the distance, right? Ramping up the activity to get closer and closer towards being back in September and then pitching leverage innings in October. Dylan Dodd is also a guy that can pitch leverage innings, and you haven't really been using him like that. So I'm going to make the joke. I know we're all tired of it. It's like making a trade without making a trade. If you can end up adding Dylan Dodd to your leverage group when you weren't really using him like that until now. That'll do it for the special bonus edition of Braves Today. This originally started as a newsletter over at bravestoday.com. It is free to read. There is no paywall at Braves Today. So a free subscription sharing with your friends, that is always great. You are more than welcome to subscribe to the newsletter. From a paid perspective, paid memberships are turned on. That goes to support what we do here at Braves Today with the podcast, with the newsletter, everything else that we do. Until next time, this has been Braves Today.